Hello and welcome, guys. We continue talking about behavioral change, and today in particular, we're going to talk about behavior activation. This is wonderful technique that can be used in many different circumstances. So stay with me. Of course, many of us don't like doing what feels unpleasant. Many of us don't want to do what we don't want to do. That's why we search for motivation. That's why we search for some kind of tool to make ourselves feel happy to do something we don't want to do. We might procrastinate, we might avoid doing what we need to do, and behavior activation is something that helps us. Imagine that you had some kind of pill that you can take, and from that pill you will get the ability to do things despite not wanting to do them, to do things independently of whether you want to do them or not, whether you feel motivated or not. And now make this mental exercise and write down what you would be doing in that case. Would you exercise? Would you eat differently? Would you sleep differently? Would you socialize more? Would you develop some new skills? What you would be doing if motivation was not an issue, if your desire to do something was not an issue. Please feel free to pause the video and to write it down. What your goal would be and what you can do for that and how you can do it and if you're ready to do it. Yeah. Also, you can reflect on things that you denied yourself in the past because you didn't have enough motivation, because you didn't feel like doing it, or because you didn't want to do it, and what you would do differently if you could act despite your desire at that moment, and how it would change your present life. What you can do after that is writing down the list of things that you would be doing. And the technique of behavior activation is choosing the tiniest, smallest step and doing that smallest step. For example, your goal is to exercise each day, like doing yoga, let's say. Behavior activation would be just putting on yoga clothes or exercise clothes and putting yoga mat on your floor, and that's it. And then you can continue if you want to or stop. This is behavior activation. It works on several principles. First principle is oftentimes what is difficult is to start doing something. So when we do this activation, when we already do the first several steps to start something, then we can as well continue and it's easier for us. So this is one way in which behavior activation works. Second way in which it works is it develops discipline and it develops your ability to do things despite not feeling motivated, not feeling like doing it, and so on, because this is very important skill. Unfortunately, we cannot do everything only when we want it in life, so it's nice to have this kind of resilience to do things when we don't feel like it. And when you ask anyone who is like consistent with exercising or with their education or with their other skills or hobbies, if they do it only if they feel like it, most likely you will hear no. People get in good shape or people get in good health, and people get very good at their sport or exercise or hobby when they are not motivated about it, but when they are dedicated and when they are consistent with their exercise and workouts and so on. So the goal is to tolerate doing things that you don't want to be doing. The goal is to tolerate kind of not wanting to do something but still doing it. And the goal is to even stop paying so much attention to what you want and what you don't want. So, for example, if you decided that you brush teeth every morning, don't pay so much attention if you want to do it today or don't want to do it today. Don't even ask yourself this question. Yes, there are certain things which we need to ask ourselves about, but there are some other things where we just can not give ourselves any choice. Like, for example, if you decided that you brush teeth, you brush teeth. If you decided that you do small like a warm up or workout in the morning, you just do it. You don't waste time, you don't waste energy on arguing with yourself. Oh, but maybe I don't want to do it, and so on and so on. And behavior activation makes you used to that. So, what is your strategy of behavior activation? First of all, you decide what is your goal, what you want to achieve. Second, you decide what you need to do to get towards that goal. I encourage you to make this goal measurable, achievable, and preferably achievable in 2-3 months, not more. So choose something very realistic and small. You can make second goal, third goal, fourth goal. So don't overburden yourself with too high goal for the first step. After that, decide if you are ready to do it. If you are not, then you can use behavior activation. Decide on the smallest, tiniest step and do this step instead of the whole of the goal. Like, for example, if your goal is going for walks, just make a habit to put on shoes at certain hour. If your goal is exercise, just make it a habit to put yoga mat on the floor. If your goal is what to say, like reading a book, instead of setting a goal of reading a book for an hour, set yourself this behavior activation goal, like read the book for just 1 minute, and so on and so on and so on. I wrote my thesis when I was finishing my higher education like that. I would have a goal of just sitting in front of my computer with an open article, an open document where I would type for 5 minutes. And in my behavior activation goal, I didn't have the condition that I have to read or that I have to write anything. Condition was just to sit in front of it. And then if you're sitting in front of it without any distractions, you might as well start reading a bit. And when I start reading, I already start having some ideas, and then I already start writing. And this way I wrote it very easily. So this is how it works. Once you made first several steps, then your behavior gets triggered and you get more motivated to do it, and you do it. Behavior activation is oftentimes used when someone is depressed, when treating depression, because when you are depressed, you feel like you don't want to do anything. You don't want to eat, you don't want to go out, you don't want to move, you just want to lay in bed all day. And this is when we use behavioral activation. Behavior activation is also used when you are avoiding something because of anxiety or insecurities or fears, and this way you can slowly get used to doing something that you feel afraid about, and so on. um, yeah, what else is important? This leads us to second topic. I'm going to discuss it more in the next video, but a little bit now as well. Motivation. Many people think that in order to start doing something, they need motivation. This is very far from truth. In reality, it's very rare that motivation appears before you do something. Most commonly, motivation appears when you do something. So, in order to feel motivated, you don't need to search for some kind of inspirational quotes. In order to feel motivated, you just need to start doing something that you will want to feel motivated about. And the more you do something, the more you have the habit of doing it, the more motivated you become to continue. And this is why it's more difficult to begin doing something and to feel motivated to begin. So instead of waiting for motivation, instead of deciding whether you do something or not based on motivation, don't do that. Don't even think of your motivation. If you decided you do something, then you do it. Don't ask yourself. Don't let yourself choose every time. And this also helps you save so much energy, because we could say that you can be your own like manager, or you can be just an employee, like just doing the task. So every time you ask yourself, do I want to brush teeth this morning or not? Do I want to exercise today or not? This way you kind of call in the manager for every small thing and taking their time, taking their energy. And manager takes a lot of time and energy. So instead what you do, you call the manager to decide for you once what you're gonna do, and then your employee just does it, and you don't give yourself any choice about it. And however, here it's important for the manager to decide correctly. Like, for example, if the manager decides to give you something unrealistic to do, then of course it's difficult for the employee to perform this. So this is why we use behavior activation as a small, realistic, achievable step to be done. And your employee can do that, while manager can be doing other things. This is very, very important. Don't overwork your manager. Your manager should decide once, and then you do it. Get rid of this habit of asking yourself, do I feel like doing it or not? Do I feel motivated to do that or not? Of course, in some situations it's useful, in some decisions it's useful, but when we are talking about brushing your teeth or eating or going to sleep or doing some kind of activity, physical activity, just to maintain your health, you should not be asking yourself if I want to do this or not. And actually, um, the difference between disciplined, so-called disciplined, and undisciplined people, people who have a lot of motivation, or people who don't have motivation, is not character differences or genetical differences or something like that. The difference is that people who have developed discipline developed it throughout their life. Like, their parents encouraged them to develop discipline, their socialization included this discipline development. And people who are undisciplined, they did not have conditions to develop this discipline, and that's why they might feel overwhelmed in adult life. And by the way, it's also often problem of very talented people because they are so talented that in childhood they get everything done very easily, like that. They don't have to work hard, and then they don't develop this skill for self-discipline, and they just get used to doing things when they feel like it, when they feel motivated, and so on. While other people who are not that talented, they get used to develop skills just because they have to. So it's not something inborn, it's not something like a label of ours. It's more like skill that we develop. So people who do things and stay consistent, they don't have more motivation. They just don't give themselves a choice. They are used to seeing it that way since their childhood. They are just used that this is the norm. And it's our goal to get used to seeing those necessary things as a norm. So when we are talking about some basic necessary things like taking care of your health, eating at time in time, sleeping in time, I don't know, exercising at least a little, all those like basic healthy things like brushing your teeth and so on, those are needed to implement despite your motivation, despite your desire, and so on. And then you can generalize this skill in other spheres of your life. Like, sometimes you have to talk with someone when you don't want to do it. Sometimes you have to go do something when you don't want to do it. And when you don't give yourself a choice about it, and when you just go and do it, you actually spend less time and less energy on this thing compared to when you give yourself a choice and you spend a lot of time like, oh, but maybe I shouldn't do that, or maybe tomorrow, or something like that. So much easier to just get used to it and go there. So let's summarize. Behavior activation strategy is what? First, we decide on our goal, then we decide how we're going to achieve it, and then we make very, very tiny, measurable, tiniest steps in order to achieve that goal. And then we start doing that step every day, or doing this step regularly, and getting it into our habit to do things without motivation, to do things when we don't feel like it, and to even stop asking yourself if you want to do it. Just do it, like in this famous advertisement. Yes, and after that, you start performing it little by little, little by little, little by little, and getting used to this new way of thinking, new way of being, so that it becomes your second nature, it becomes your new norm. However, I don't want you to overuse it. This strategy is useful, but it doesn't mean that you have to become like a dictator or a tyrant over your life and control everything and force yourself to do everything when you don't want to do it. No, just decide on your top priorities when you use this no choice habits. Like, for example, when it comes to having enough sleep, having enough water, having enough food, um, I don't know, like those things for your physical and mental health. And maybe you can leave yourself more freedom when it comes to some other tasks. Um, if you want, you can also do the exercise when you judge the probability of doing this behavior activation task in percentage. Like, for example, ask yourself how likely it is that for the next week you can take out yoga mat and put it on your floor every morning at certain time in percentage. Like maybe you say 80%, okay, 80 out of 100. Then you can decide how to make it higher, what you can do so that it becomes easier for you, that the likelihood of this is higher. Like maybe you can set up notifications for yourself to remind yourself that you have to do it. Maybe you can have some kind of tracker where you put, that I did this today. Maybe you can put some kind of maybe you can have some kind of agreement with your friend that the friend is reminding you about that, and you have somebody to be accountable to, and so on. So our goal is that likelihood of you performing this behavior activation for the next week should be at least 95%. 95, not less. If the percentage of likelihood you're going to do it is less, it means you need to simplify the task, make it even simpler. Like instead of saying that I want to exercise 20 minutes every morning, tell yourself that I will exercise just 1 minute every morning. Instead of setting yourself a goal of going to your university, set yourself a goal of just putting on shoes. So the percentage of likelihood of you following through should be at least 95%. Better 100, but yeah. And if it's lower, think how you can increase the probability, how you can make it easier for you to remember this thing and to actually do it, how to make this thing smaller and easier for you to do, and so on. So hopefully you will use your behavior activation, and remember that sometimes we need to do something we don't feel like doing, and there are certain conditions when it's especially true. Like, for example, when you feel anxious, you feel like you really, really, really shouldn't do something that makes you feel anxious. But in reality, exposition and doing exposition is really helpful to get rid of this anxiety. Or when you feel depressed, you might really feel like you don't want to eat, you don't want to get out of bed. But when you actually do eat and when you actually do get out of bed, you feel better. And even if you don't feel better, it's still good to do those things. If you feel sick and you feel like, oh, I shouldn't eat, I don't have any appetite, it's still sometimes good to force yourself to eat, even if you don't feel like it. Also, like going on a walk for your mental health or for your physical health, you might not feel like it, but once you force yourself a little, it actually helps you. So behavior activation is very wonderful strategy for starting things that you don't feel like doing, or that you're scared of doing, or that you feel uncomfortable doing, and so on. And the trick here is that we set very tiny small first step, and we just get used to doing that first step and develop our discipline and develop our ability to do things without asking ourselves, without giving ourselves any choice if we want to do it or not want to do it. And then we do this again and again and again and again. And most people, once we do small tiny step, once we do the beginning, then it's much easier to continue. And most people, when they just put yoga mat on the floor, they already decide, okay, I put yoga mat, I can as well do a little bit of stretching. Then they do a little bit of stretching and they feel like, I feel like I want to do that as well, that as well. And then before they notice, they already exercise for half an hour. So this is how behavior activation works. And also, in some days, you might not actually exercise for an hour. You might actually just put the mat on the floor, but it doesn't matter, because the goal is not to do the exercise per se. The goal is to develop this habit of doing things without asking yourself if you want it or not. Yes, so no choice habits, let's call them like this. Yeah, so behavior activation, and remember that the likelihood of you doing it should be more than 95%, not less. If it is less than that, make the task simpler or invent ways of making sure you actually do it. Yeah, and I see you next week. Please write down in the comments which behavior activation you decided to perform during next week, and what it can be, and what kind of behaviors you're going to try. I will be very interested to read it, and it's always nice to see that there is some kind of influence I'm making with those videos, so I'm really looking forward to that. And remember that the best thank you can give me is sharing my videos with your friends and family and in your social media and so on. And I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.